Good afternoon. I'm Ken Tremiel from Rush University Medical Center. I am today presenting to, I'm sorry, to Miss Gloria and her team, the CBT and other therapies for SUD. Today's learning objectives will be to develop a basic knowledge of the importance of CBT in clinical practice and the conditions for which it can be used, to understand the key principles of CBT and the activating event, belief, consequence concept. Also, to develop the ability to perceive thinking errors in oneself and others, and to understand the basic techniques that are used for various conditions. Also, to be able to set specific, positive, observable, realistic, and timed goals for oneself and others. This is called the SPORT model. The SPORT model is very important, is a very important tool in goal setting in CBT because it provides the framework for the client to be able to create goals that are not only measurable, but are also reflective of their personal desires to reach recovery. This level of investment vastly increases the potential for success. So now let's look at the lesson overview. This presentation will introduce us to CBT. It'll talk about the principles of CBT. It'll talk about some of the thinking errors that are encountered when a person is initially entering into substance use disorder and what they experience, and the thinking errors they also experience when they are in relapse. We'll also look at how drugs impact the brain. We'll look at CBT in practice, how we utilize some of the techniques when we encounter urges and triggers, as well as emotions in different social situations, and then hopefully have a discussion and the conclusion. So let's start off with a working definition of what CBT is. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is a talking therapy that can help you manage your problems by changing the way you think and behave. It's most commonly used to treat anxiety and depression, but can be useful for other mental and physical health problems, such as substance use disorder. Now, CBT is considered the gold standard as it pertains to talk therapies. It is a significant tool in substance use treatment because it addresses environmental triggers and promotes the development of alternative coping skills. Now, a lot of people ask, what are talk therapies? And talk therapies are basically therapies like CBT and psychotherapy, and usually they're compared with other interventions like counseling. The difference being that counseling can focus on specific areas or specific issues. Talk therapies like CBT and psychotherapy can cover a broad range of issues. Like in the definition alone, you can see that it can deal with anxiety and emotion, which are emotional disorders, but it also can be used for physical health problems. Someone who's dealing with chronic disease like diabetes and the different levels of anxiety and depression that come along with that, as well as substance use disorder. So we utilize talk therapies, and especially CBT, in this manner because it allows us to be in a conversation, and it allows for the client to be able to have a large investment in his or her treatment. Okay. When we start talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and how we want to be able to introduce it to our clients, we actually start having conversation about what the thought process is as a person is in the early stages of change, whether they're contemplating using drugs or whether they're contemplating going into recovery. A lot of times what we find is this particular thought process or internal dialogue is the process where a person gets to the decision-making point where they're either going to engage in SUD practices, or if they're in the process of relapsing. So the first thing is that it's thoughts. You have a thought about whether or not this particular drug or illicit drug may provide you with any level of pleasure or relief. And that generates feelings about it, and any kind of obstacles or any kind of predisposition you had prior to that, when you have these kinds of thoughts, it usually removes those hurdles and barriers and moves you forward in having these feelings, which inevitably leads to urges. Most clinicians feel like these urges lead you or push you toward acting, which means that it could possibly lead to you using drugs or relapsing. And inevitably, what happens, your actions leads to consequences. And those consequences often lead us to either become engaged in addictive behavior that inevitably interferes with the way that we interact with our families, our employment, our social groups, and our livelihood. Usually, the internal dialogue leads to a war between the two bodies of thought that often govern our behavior. Those two bodies are the cognitive distortion and rational response. Now, the way that I can best illustrate that is if you can recall, like in instances like on television, you have the devil on one side and an angel on the other side. And the devil is telling you all these different things about how you should go ahead and make this wrong decision, whereas the angel is telling you the other option of what the good parts of it and why you shouldn't do whatever the particular situation is. But cognitive distortion is significant and is directly associated with negative self-talk. And in this particular instance, the thinking errors that we mentioned in our lesson overview, the rational response is the positive self-talk. And when we look at this particular list, we look at what cognitive distortion calls stinking thinking, and that is overtly negative thinking in regards to thinking that the outcome of whatever the situation is has already been decided and is decidedly negative. So you should just move on and do it anyway because it's gonna happen. It may provide you with some level of feeling good or some level of removing whatever depressive state you're in, but stinking thinking is just overtly negative. Now, on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you have sane thinking that says that, hey, you haven't done anything yet. There's still time to back out. There's still time to make a rational and good decision. There's no need to make such a drastic move just yet. And that's the dichotomy of the two right there. The second one in cognitive distortion is my committee. And basically that is the group of people who may or who may not be around you, but may have some level of influence with you that are nudging you and urging you to continue to take part or to start taking part in these negative behaviors. And a lot of times that particular kind of pressure, in some cases with young people and with adults, is peer pressure. When those things come into play along with stinking thinking, it becomes overwhelming to be able to combat that. Again, the natural adverse or opposite adversary to the my committee approach is your conscience. Often your conscience will be your moral barometer in regards to being able to determine if, hey man, this is not going to be good for me. I know this. I'm still in my right mind where I haven't gone too far that I can't come back from it. And those two warring bodies kind of go back and forth. The next one is pretty interesting to me when it says the old tapes. The old tapes is basically your brain and telling you, replaying all of your past mistakes. All of them come back in a whole, just like a film of everything that you've ever done that's been negative, that has been counterproductive, and it has contributed to you being on this journey right now where you're thinking about making a very, very drastic mistake. Those old tapes, if you will, are basically validating whatever behavior that you're trying to that you're in a dilemma about. And the old tapes tell you that you've always been on this path and this is your natural destination. Your recovery tools are actually and this speaks to someone who has already been through the stages, the pre-contemplation, contemplation, all of those stages of change that has led them to addiction. So a person who has already acquired recovery tools have already been here and has been through relapse prevention and has tools that have enabled them in the past to be able to combat whatever negative aspects that have got them to this point. So at that point, you want to call on your recovery tools. You want to talk about maybe utilizing some kind of distraction or looking for some level of support that may be outside of your mind. You may have a peer or someone that you call upon that might be able to help you at this point. But whatever your recovery tool is, that's what you want to call on, or set of tools, if you will. Whatever those tools are, you want to call upon them at this point, because now you have this whole this whole flashback reel in your head about all the things that you've done that have led you up to this point. Now, my addict voice. This particular part of the presentation, I was questioning whether or not I should modify it, just because of our past trainings where we've talked about stigma and some of the language that has been used, and we try to stay away from words like addict and dope and things like that. Those kind of negative connotative words are things that we've been trying to work out of our vocabulary. But for the sake of getting the full impact of what this particular these particular principles of cognitive behavior therapy, I left it in because I think that it speaks directly to what the mindset is of a person who's having this dilemma, and it speaks in layman's terms and direct terms of how people speak to themselves when they're in these situations. So I left the word addict in. And the addict voice is the voice that says that, man, you're going to get pleasure from this. You know how this felt before. You know that this particular, whatever it is, whether it's a drink, whether it's popping a pill, whether it's injecting heroin, whatever it is, you're going to relive all of those moments that gave you pleasure. So it's at that point that you're looking at really, really looking at the recovery part of yourself, not the tools that you use externally anymore, but the voice inside your head that has allowed you to be able to come through this situation before and has given you positive self-talk to get you past this point. And this is where these two bodies are warring against each other, when the addict voice and the recovery self are constantly going back and forth. And it's kind of based on it's based on the level of support you've received before and how you utilize these tools to this point, whether or not it's decided which one of these voices win. The lower power, again, talks to all of the different levels and the different things that have contributed to you making bad decisions. The moment when you feel yourself succumb to the getting high process. All of those different things are brought about from the lower power. Now your higher power is doing just the opposite. It's trying to give you some memories or some encouragement of when you were able to overcome this before, how it felt to be able to come through a program and graduate from it. To have services terminated, but you're linked to community resources and things like that to be able to deal with the issues on your own, and you want to reach back for that higher power to be able to help you when you feel like you are being overwhelmed by the addict voice, the lower power, and all the other negative aspects of your thinking that has got you to this point and in this war. Now, the rat brain is the brain that's just, for lack of a better term, it's cutthroat. It talks about all the different things that you've done that you're ashamed of, the things that have occurred while you've been in the throes of substance use disorder, and some of the things that you have looked at that have caused you to be shameful, that has probably caused you distance from your loved ones, and it's all or nothing thinking. It basically tells you that there's no use in us going back and forth about whether or not this is a good decision or a bad decision. Ultimately, you know what you've done in the past. You're going to repeat that behavior. The God brain is the part of you that hopefully is linked to your spiritual side, where you can call on God or whatever your belief in higher power is, that allows you to find out that there's something greater than yourself that you can call upon when you feel like you have no other alternative. And it's that side that really, really looks at being able to overcome this entire process. The dark side, again, is relatively the same as the rat brain, that allows you to go into the deeper caverns of yourself, your soul, if you will, looking at all the things that you may have done, all the things you've thought about doing, all the things that have brought you very, very close to either doing something extremely regretful that will have enormous consequences, and you're right there again. And the light side is the part that allows you to think, hey, man, if I'm here in this particular position, that means that all is not lost. That means that I'm still here. I'm still in the position that I can be salvaged. I can be helped. I can be saved. And lastly, we talk about Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll, which is, again, goes back to the fictional characters that are in from the old H.G. Wells novel, where there's actually these two personalities inside of this person, with Dr. Hyde or Dr. Jekyll being a very, very smart, intelligent doctor who has created a potion of sorts that allows him to get in touch with his inner self, and that inner self happens to be a monstrosity, a huge beast-like, animal-like person that does not have the ability to make conscious decisions. And a lot of this, again, a lot of psychotherapists and clinicians think that everyone has these two sides to them. To some degree, I agree with that, but I also think that the higher, more intelligent side has the ability to be able to control and keep that other side at bay. But I do think that with the introduction of illicit drugs and other things that are effective to our brain, our personalities, and our behavior, we allow that other side to be able to gain more control and more power over ourselves. And that's what we see here. Lastly, we just look at what the categories are called, and they're basically negative self-talk and positive self-talk. As I alluded to earlier, I think whichever side wins is based on how we've been able to cope and deal with things before. Our entire experience, our entire lived experience, are going to be a cycle or chronicle of wins and losses in whatever battle. We're going to fail. We're going to win sometimes, but it's going to be the times that we put the most emphasis on that will allow us to be able to either give in to cognitive distortion or give in to our rational responses. And hopefully, if a person is in cognitive behavioral therapy, they've surrounded themselves with the foundational pieces of support, uh, finding viable distractions, and things of that nature to be able to help the rational response portion of their brain and their thoughts to be able to win out when they're faced with a dilemma of this kind. Okay. This next part, this is the actual video. So for purposes of the recording, I'll just play it. Okay, Miss Gloria. All right.
Most people will take a pill, receive an injection, or otherwise take some kind of medicine during their lives, but most of us don't know anything about how these substances actually work. How can various compounds impact the way we physically feel, think, and even behave? For the most part, this depends on how a drug alters the communication between cells in the brain. There are a number of different ways that can happen. But before it gets into the brain, any drug must first reach the bloodstream on a journey that can take anywhere from seconds to hours, depending on factors like how it's administered. The slowest method is to take a drug orally, because it must be absorbed by our digestive system before it takes effect. Inhaling a drug gets it into the bloodstream faster, and injecting a drug intravenously works quickly too, because it pumps the chemicals directly into the blood. Once there, the drug quickly reaches the gates of its destination, the brain. The entrance to this organ is guarded by the blood-brain barrier, which separates blood from the nervous system to keep potentially dangerous substances out. So all drugs must have a specific chemical composition, which gives them the key to unlock this barrier and pass through. Once inside, drugs start to interfere with the brain's normal functioning by targeting its web of neurons and synapses. Neurons are brain cells that have a nucleus, dendrites, and an axon. Synapses are structures placed along the dendrites or the axon, which allow the exchange of electrochemical signals between neurons. Those signals take the form of chemicals called neurotransmitters. Each neurotransmitter plays different roles in regulating our behaviors, emotions, and cognition, but they all work in one of two ways. They can either inhibit the receiving neuron, limiting its activity, or excite it, creating a new electrochemical signal that spreads throughout the network. Any leftover neurotransmitter usually gets degraded or reabsorbed into the transmitting neuron. A drug's effectiveness stems from its ability to manipulate these synaptic transmissions at different phases of the process. That results in an increase or a decrease in the amount of neurotransmitters being spread. For instance, common antidepressants, like SSRIs, stop the reabsorption of serotonin, a neurotransmitter that modulates our moods. This effectively pushes more of it into the neural network. Meanwhile, painkillers, like morphine, raise levels of serotonin and noradrenaline, which regulate energy, arousal, alertness, and pleasure. Those same neurotransmitters also affect endorphin receptors, reducing pain perception. And tranquilizers work by increasing the production of GABA to inhibit neural activity, putting the person in a relaxed or sedated state. What about illegal or illicit drugs? These have powerful impacts on the brain that we're still trying to understand. Crystal meth, an amphetamine, induces a long-lasting release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked with the perception of reward and pleasure. It also activates noradrenaline receptors, which increases the heart rate, dilates pupils, and triggers the body's fight or flight response. Cocaine blocks the reuptake of dopamine and serotonin, pushing more into the network where they boost energy, create feelings of euphoria, and suppress appetites. And hallucinogenic drugs have some of the most puzzling effects. Substances like LSD, mescaline, and DMT all block the release of serotonin, which regulates mood and impulsivity. They also have an impact on the neural circuits involved in perception, learning, and behavioral regulation, which may explain why these drugs have such powerful impacts. Even if some of these effects sound exciting, there are reasons why some of these drugs are highly controlled and often illegal. Drugs have the power to alter the brain's chemistry. and repeated use can permanently rewire the neural networks that support our ability to think, make decisions, learn, and remember things. There's a lot we still don't know about drugs and their effects, both the good and the bad. But those we do know about are the ones we've studied closely and turned into effective medicines. As our knowledge grows about drugs and the brain, the possibilities will also increase for treating the many medical problems that puzzle researchers today.
Okay, so hopefully this video was able to provide some information about the effect that drugs have on our brain, and will hopefully also that I hope that it also illustrated the difficult task that therapists and clinicians have in trying to help combat how these drugs not only affect the brain, but how it subsequently impacts our behavior and and all the other aspects of our life. Trying to employ behavior modification like CBT or any of the other methods that we use, dialectical behavior training, motivational interviewing, things of that nature, are all basically kind of external ways of trying to deal with something that has been injected into our bodies that is really that really has an adverse effect on our center of what keeps us going, and that's our brain. The thing that's really interesting about this particular video is that it talks about how drug use over time really can impact how the brain works, and that also subsequently impacts how treatment works, because the more you use the drug, the more you have to use the drug, the more it tends to adversely affect the way that the brain works, which makes therapy and treatment that much more difficult. One of the things that we see with the fentanyl use now, which is extremely prevalent amongst people who suffer from SUD treatment, is that over time we see that cognitively the interventions that we have been utilizing to help with trying to cope with relapse and recovery tend to start becoming more difficult and are not nearly as effective. And that's because of the deterioration that we're seeing in neurotransmitters and things like that in the brain, as drug use has been used countless times over a long period of time. So when we look at that and we look at how the drugs are affecting the brain, I think this video is a clear illustration of what clinicians and what we as community-based resources are up against when we're trying to provide treatment for this particular client population. Okay, so now we look at the cognitive behavioral therapy and practice for SUD. Therapy helps to manage urges and triggers. It teaches us skills for refusing substances, and it also helps manage emotions or social problems that lead to substance use disorder. So let's deal with the first. How does CBT help to manage urges and triggers? Well, it helps by helping the client finding connections between their thoughts, their feelings, and actions, and it increases their awareness of how these things are impacting them in recovery. So when a person is able to understand the situations and the things that occur, usually not sequentially, but in some order, that we know that, okay, this leads to me being involved with this particular group, and usually I end up becoming involved in whatever behavior it is, whether it be drinking, whether it be using drugs or whatever. These situations come about and I end up in this situation. The other thing that CBT does is it teaches you and it provides you with the skills for being able to refuse substances. Some of the methods that are used in CBT is avoidance. Avoid being in those environments where substances are in abundance. The other thing is to create and implement a support team, whether that means having someone who's accessible by phone or text. And inevitably, if those people are unavailable, creating what we call an escape plan. And that's a means of abruptly leaving an environment that has drugs or anything that will provoke any kind of illicit behavior that you feel is going to be that's either going to create a situation where you are involved in using drugs or you're provoked to use drugs. CBT can also help identify the negative cycles that have persistently contributed to these problems and emotions, often by using problem-solving methods. What we try and do when it comes to social problems is everything is not going to be resolved in a therapeutic setting per se. Sometimes things have to be resolved in a community-based setting, because all problems are not going to be issues that are in and around necessarily our behavior, but there's social issues that arise that are impacted by our behavior. For instance, like I may be someone who's suffering from substance use disorder, and because of my behavior, my utility bills are extremely high, or I may not have groceries or things of that nature. Most of the time, your CBT therapist can connect you with resources that will help you to resolve those social problems. Sending you to utility assistance programs or putting you in touch with them. I think it's called IHEAP. Directing you into the direction of grocery pantries and things of that nature. All of those are community-based resources that can help you and that can alleviate some of those issues and stressors that are contributing to those particular behaviors. Now, how do we manage our urges? What are urges? I'm sorry. It says, what are urges? Urges and triggers are intense physical responses that are biological, psychological, and social aspects of SUD. The first step, I just read that. I'm sorry, Ms. Lori. Okay, so managing urges. So we look at the five ways that this process can actually come into play and what we can do. The first one is to delay. Putting off or reacting to your urges should make you aware that urges come and go and are not and you not acting on them is sometimes the best way to handle them. A lot of times what we're looking for is a diversion in this particular case. And we'll talk about that in probably the next slide. But the other one is one that we mentioned already, and that's escape. And that's coming up with a strategy that involves removing yourself from the situation that triggered your urges, maybe excusing yourself from a particular social gathering, and leaving, just physically leaving that particular situation sometimes can abruptly stop the urges and the triggers that initially started you down this path. Avoidance, we talked about that too. Learn to avoid those situations. If there's a social gathering or an event where you know that there's going to be an abundance of alcohol, or someone is going to have a lot of different drugs or whatever, you just may want to avoid that altogether. And a lot of times, in trying to adapt and reacclimate to our social settings, we're very reluctant to cut off a lot of our social groups and some of the things that we did traditionally, places that we went to and things of that nature. But in the true essence of trying to seek change, some of those things have to be changed and modified. And we may have to seek to either find other groups or other alternatives, or just to find a replacement for those things. We're not trying to say to take something away and not replace it with anything. We know that that's the best way to actually to deal with those kinds of issues. But in the interim, sometimes the abrupt avoidance of something is the best way until you can find something to be able to replace it with. Distraction. Take control of your urges by being busy. We'll talk about some examples of how to do that, but you have to be able to distract yourself, preferably with something that you enjoy or like. This talks about physical activity and things of that nature, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Substitute, taking one thing and replacing it with another. When you have the urge to do something unhealthy, sometimes the best way to divert yourself is by looking to try to be of aid or assistance to someone else. So a lot of times we see things like people try to volunteer, people try to be part of groups or mediate groups, and things of that nature, to be able to substitute that urge to be able to the urge that you want to engage in that behavior sometimes can be substituted by utilizing that energy to be of assistance or support to someone else. Okay. CBT also talks about teaching methods for substance refusal. When we talk about substance refusal, we want you to be adamant. The same way we would we in motivational interviewing, we don't want to just use one word answers. It's the same in substance refusal when we're in CBT. You have to say more than no. Elaborate, be demonstrative. No, I have to drive, or no, I'm trying to keep my head clear. Invoke safety. The fact that you don't want to get a DUI, or you don't want to be involved in any kind of accident because you're impaired, things of that nature. Definitely you want to be demonstrative and be stern in the way that you start out in being in refusal mode when you're approached with taking part in any substance abuse or alcohol intake. Also, be aware that often these situations are going to take place in an environment where it won't just be one person. It'll be by committee, as we talked about before. And peer pressure can be applied by a group of people. And that group may be trying to pressure you to drink or to use. Stand firm. And in those particular instances, that's when you want to be able to seek out your safety net, seek out support. And that may mean that you call somebody, or you contact contact a friend who has been supportive, a peer maybe. Or in some instances, that may be the time when you may have to go to an AA meeting or something of that nature. The other thing is redirection. Sometimes redirecting the attention away from the particular instance of somebody offering you something to drink, you may counter with saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat," or let's partake in whatever activities there may be a band playing or something like that. But you want to try redirection when you're in a situation where you feel like you're about to become overwhelmed. And again, when all else fails, when you've tried all these other different forms of refusal, just leave. Map out your escape plan. Look for an exit that you'll be able to leave out of, that won't draw a lot of attention to yourself, or when that group or something is distracted, make a quick exit. All those things may seem drastic, and may seem like it may be an overreaction, but these are all things that are keys to your well-being, and are keys to you not sliding back into those behaviors. So you want to try to take advantage as much as you can of using these refusal methods. Okay, and as we mentioned earlier, some of the ways that we can shift and manage our emotions is by using physical activity. It's a great method for managing urges. And also, we're finding that discovering hobbies such as walking and things like that, it releases endorphins, which are good hormones that affect our mood and determines if we're happy and things like that. So, exercise and activity like that releases those things and create a an actual positive diversion that will keep you away from looking at the emotional state you are that usually pushes you toward making those bad decisions. The other thing is that we look at TV and developing other TV and movies. Those are also great distractions and are positive alternatives that can help you relax and divert your attention away from possible relapse and things like that. The other thing that has proven to be very, very positive and a good alternative is talking and processing. And this is actually what's at the core of the actual intervention. As we mentioned earlier, CBT is what's called a talk therapy. So it's an exchange. It's a opportunity to have discussion in and around the person, but we're actually encouraging the client to be as engaged and open as possible. So in doing that, what that may call on from a clinician or a support person is that you have to have accessibility. And that might mean someone contacting you in unconventional times, at unconventional hours. And sometimes it may just be you being reflective in the way that you listen and not offering any kind of retort or response. But being able to talk to a person or even a group uh, is actually a great way to be able to process and is a very viable option when looking at managing your emotions. The other thing is journaling. Journaling has proven to be one of the very efficient coping skills that has been an extremely good way of processing. And the reason why it is proven to be so positive is because is the client's actual feelings and emotion that are written down in a physical, tangible way. And it serves as physical evidence of what you were feeling at that time, what you were feeling in that moment, and it's not watered down. It's those things that are utilized in creating a treatment plan that makes it more of something that the client can invest in because it has already that he or she has already been a huge contributor to what is going to be part of the resolution and treatment models that are going to be used to help them come through this successfully. Lastly, we talk about meditation and breathing exercises. This helps the client calm themselves down. It allows them to be able to listen to their bodies and to find inner peace. These self-sustaining methods are very, very good ways of relaxation, and it isn't anything that requires the assistance of anyone else. Once they have gotten to the point that they are self-sustaining and they find that these practices can help them when they're by themselves, a lot of times they can avert a lot of the crises and trauma echoes that usually are provocative and moving them toward being involved with some of the past substance use disorder practices and or relapse. Okay, so moving away from CBT, one of the other therapies that we talk that has proven to be um, very very helpful is motivational interviewing, and the reason why we look at motivational interviewing is because of the way. First of all, the technique is very very closely related to CBT. But its major focus is on moving clients away from ambivalence and more toward being person-centered in their progress. The approach actually is it goes even further toward moving away from confrontational engagement kind of language and methods that we see in a lot of the old school and previous abstinence approaches. A lot of that is a lot of yelling, a lot of in your face stuff. Motivational interviewing is exactly the opposite. It embraces it it embraces more of the welcoming and client invested processes that are characteristic of harm reduction. It also focuses more on the stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, relapse prevention. I mean, relapse and termination. Ultimately, the principles of this is that it expresses empathy. It definitely is one of those practices and intervention techniques that stresses that the person is not alone in this battle. The other thing is that it allows you to develop some level of discrepancy for you to be able to look at some of your past choices and not be so condemning in your thoughts. Like again, I said it's very closely related to CBT, but the focus is more on the dialogue and the exchange. And most of that exchange is utilized with the ORS method. The ORS method is using open-ended questions, whereas again we don't take one-word answers. If we're asking a person how they're doing, how are you doing today? They may say fine. We want to continue down that road. So what did you do? What did you do to get to this point? What activities have you taken part in? You want to continuously keep the client engaged and have them investing in the conversation so that they ultimately are going to be leading the conversation. You want to be able to be supportive by providing affirmations, head nod, or saying or giving supportive speech in regards to saying that something that they did was great, complimenting them on. It could be on their physical appearance, it could be on the way that they handled a particular situation or something that they were confronted with earlier in the day and alluded to in one of the prior open-ended questions. But you want to make sure that you affirm that that person has been able to reframe and look at how they've done things and be able to add a positive spin on those things. The other thing is that you don't want to do a lot of talking, but you want to be a reflective listener. And in that, you want to make sure that you're paying attention. When I'm engaged in motivational interviewing, I try not to use a lot of pads. I try not to do a lot of writing. Try to commit a lot of things to memory so that I can be engaged in the moment and reflective listening. Being able to hear exactly what they're saying, being able to repeat it back to them is important in reflective listening. And in doing that, being able to lastly summarize it, to be able to bring everything full circle in regards to what the conversation is in this particular session, allowing the person to know that I was definitely listening. I'm able to repeat these things back to you, and look at it and shape it in a way where we can move forward and look at some kind of resolution to continue to move forward in therapy and in our particular whatever our particular issue is that we're dealing with. Nowadays, it's difficult because of the things that have occurred with the pandemic. The personal approach to motivational interviewing, which is a very, very huge part of it, has kind of been taken away through telehealth and Zooms and things like this. So on the occasion, and since things are loosening up, on the occasion when we have an opportunity to meet and talk in person with an individual, definitely recommend doing that, and making sure that they are aware of all the resources that are available to them should they not be able to get in contact with me or a particular clinician, that there are things that are at their disposal. I know we're pressed for time, Ms. Gloria. I'm going to this last slide.
No, take your time.
Okay. So one of the things that we look at now is the MAR, our MAR group, and the other thing is the 988 suicide hotline. The MAR is a new hotline that has been introduced to us through the Department of Public Health that allows you to be able to get not only medical assistant recovery help over the phone, but it also allows you to be able to get therapeutic help. Sometimes you can get them. Sometimes it's actually, you can actually get a physical appointment in the same day. We have had we've experienced some level of success with this particular program recently. We've been working with some of our clients who are coming into our program through reentry, who are coming out of being incarcerated and other system impacted situations, and have experienced some relapse problems. Sometimes halfway houses and things of that nature have not been, for lack of a better term, as welcoming as we would like. But the MAR hotline and the suicide hotline have proven to be very helpful resources. We are now working with the Department of Public Health to try to provide some mental health resources to them as well, with some of our community resources that have mobile clinics and things like that, to be able to provide mobile triage to people who are experiencing issues that are in the community. Some may be experiencing homelessness and things of that nature, but the services have expanded, and you're able to get those services right at your fingertips by utilizing these community resources outside of your one-to-ones or whoever you have a clinical relationship with. So that actually brings to conclusion the first part of this. If there's any questions or anything like that, if you run this back to your team, if they have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, I know that this is our usual setup for the presentation is a lot of discussion in regards to some of the participants' personal experiences with CBT, and some of us are even using it without knowing we're using it, in regards to helping people to shape their different behaviors and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this is helpful. We might be able to look at doing part 2 of this when we reconvene for our next training module, which you and I can set up. But thank you for your attention today. Thanks for helping me walk through this. This is actually the second time I did this, so this was another ring in the ladder that I'm trying to get up in regards to getting more and more skilled at presenting and things of that nature. So thank you, Ms. Gloria, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kenneth.